Have you ever imagined and thought about the amount of trauma the apostles experienced during Holy Week? Well, I have, and that's what I'm going to talk about in this video. I'm going to talk about trauma in general for a little bit, and then connect it to what I imagine the apostles experienced during Holy Week thousands of years ago. Thanks for joining me. I'm Laura Nicola. I'm your faithful therapist, and let's dive in. So let's talk about trauma in general first. What is trauma? We all know the word. We all know PTSD. We kind of joke sometimes and call things, oh, that was traumatic. But what actually is it? Well, it's unique to the individual. So what I experience as traumatic, you might not, or vice versa. The literature on trauma talks about little t trauma and big T trauma, and kind of distinguishes it between being what's unique to that person. So for example, a little t trauma to one person of being bullied, for example, might not be as traumatic as it might be to another person that has chronic bullying that they would call big T trauma, because that sticks more with them. So it's very individualized what it is. And it's important to know that, because we can't just fit into this little box of, oh, that's trauma. Probably more subject matters, are traumatic for more people than not. But again, it all depends on that person. It depends on their kind of healthy predisposition before the trauma. It depends how quickly they can get help and recover from it. So it's very individualized. But ultimately, what happens with trauma is trauma disturbs our brain's ability to process memories. So what this means is that our traumatic experiences get stuck in our implicit memory system. Our implicit memory system is also basically our unconscious memory system. This is brain-based. So this is the only memory system that is present at birth. So, we think of babies, and they have implicit memory systems in their brains that are developed from day one, which is pretty fascinating. But traumatic experiences get stuck in those implicit memory systems, and that then affects our nervous system. So our nervous system is probably it does lead to that fight, flight, or freeze instinct that probably a lot of us have heard about, because again, that's a brain-based experience. So the nervous system has a difficult time regulating kind of the body's reaction to these unconscious traumatic experiences, which make it really difficult to function in the moment. So let's kind of use the example of the apostles to kind of lay this out a little bit more, right? So let's just think about the amount of trauma the apostles experienced Holy Thursday and Good Friday alone, right? They, are experiencing a lot of the symptoms of what I just explained, right? They're experiencing confusion about what Jesus is saying on Holy Thursday, of him saying, well, one of you will betray me. Peter, you're going to deny me. I'm leaving, basically. Can you imagine the amount of confusion that they experienced? And then betrayal. Judas literally betrayed Jesus, but he also was a friend to the other 11 apostles. And they, I'm sure, felt betrayed by him as well. And just shock. Can you imagine? Everything seems good. They're having a Passover meal on Thursday evening. It all seems good. And then all of a sudden things change. They had known that, the Pharisees and the Sanhedrin and etc., had issues with Jesus, but it kind of seemed all of a sudden, that they targeted him. So there was probably a lot of shock going on. But then the nervous system response, right? So the fight, flight, or freeze response, the apostles definitely fell into. So Holy Thursday in the garden, right? There was a kind of a natural instinct for fight, first of all. When the guards and Judas came to arrest Jesus, there was a fight that broke out. I think it was Peter that cut off, the high priest's ear, or whoever it was. And so they jumped into action, right? So that was a fight instinct. Well, then Jesus kind of reprimanded them in a way and said, we're not going to do this. We're not going to fight. So then they fled. And this is not just like a short flee, right? I mean, none of them really came back, all of a sudden, after thinking about it for, the rest of Holy Thursday night into, Friday morning, they didn't think, oh, maybe we should go back, so they definitely stayed in that traumatic experience of, let's flee and kind of save ourselves. And I guess you could call that kind of freeze too. Wherever they were hiding, they were probably frozen in that place and not able to kind of think clearly about what needed to be done. So then, the passion of the Christ obviously happens, and, Christ dies on the cross. And let's fast forward through that to Holy Saturday today, thousands of years ago. So the apostles are probably in a state of hyperarousal, which again means their nervous system is out of whack. They're probably out of their window of tolerance, which is basically their ability to kind of make sure that the frontal part of their brain is online and fully capable of thinking. And they're probably being run by emotions. But they're probably, again, still in shock, but they've now learned of Christ's death. So they're also in immediate grief. So there's a lot going on for them, as they're still kind of hiding away, because I think they're also probably fearful of their own safety. And when we talk about trauma, we talk about like a real or imaginary kind of perceived threat. And again, that can vary for every person, but the apostles probably thought that they were in real danger, and they could have been, right? I mean, when people were calling Peter out when he was denying Christ, they were asking if he was one of them. I'm sure that put him, in kind of probably the fight instinct, which is kind of what he did by, verbally denying Christ, but that would have been really scary. So they're here in their trauma, right? But there's also, with trauma, there's also a future component, which is anticipating what's to come. And so I imagine that they had high anxiety. They were probably playing through a million scenarios of what now, what to do, how are we going to make this better? Christ is gone, our leader is gone, what do we do, right? I can just imagine kind of the racing thoughts going through all of their heads. And some of them probably experienced PTSD symptoms. They probably were having flashbacks. Maybe if they kind of heard about, Christ's crucifixion, or maybe some of them saw it, I don't know. I'm sure there's flashbacks. There's probably an inability to sleep. There's probably sadness and grief and fear and hopelessness and all of those emotions that get just kind of twirled into trauma. And they're probably questioning themselves. They're probably questioning the last 3 years with Jesus. They're probably questioning what to do next. There's kind of a trauma robs us of the present. It kind of forces us into the past with our PTSD symptoms, or just kind of reliving those memories. But it also just like makes us so fearful and anxious of the future. And so it's really hard to be in the present moment, fully capable of kind of having those rational thoughts, because again, like our brain kind of takes over, and our fight or flight instinct comes over, which is brain based. So they went through a lot. And, if we ourselves ever feel like we're alone in experiencing trauma, think again, we're not. There's lots of ways to connect what we go through, with our trauma back to the apostles in this example, right? And so it's just nice to be able to connect that, to our faith as well. And luckily for the apostles, Easter Sunday came pretty quickly. But, there was still fear. Thomas still doubted. They were still in fear for their lives. I mean, a lot of them ended up becoming martyrs. And so, it was a perceived threat to their life that they, were proclaiming that Christ had risen from the dead. So the road was not exactly psychologically easy for them here on out, but they did have some of their, good coping skills, let's say, back in place regarding their faith. So anyways, this was kind of fun to talk about in my in my mind. So hopefully it's informative and helpful just to kind of understand trauma a little bit, but also just kind of, I don't know, connecting it again to our faith and realizing that, you know, we're not alone in our trauma. There's people in the, you know, in the scripture, in the Bible, that we can connect to regarding that. And even they weren't free from trauma. And so, you know, we can use our faith, you know, as a coping skill for that matter. Anyways, hope this was fun and informative for you. Wish you many blessings on this Holy Saturday. Of course, always, you know, I ask that you subscribe here, leave me comments, leave me questions, leave me reflections, and then follow me on my other channels. And yeah, stay tuned for more videos, and many blessings.